Welcome back to the LCC Leaders Forum. I am delighted to introduce some absolute media royalty for our Meet the Editors session. Lydia Slater is here, the newly appointed Editor-in-Chief of Harper's Bazaar and Town & Country. Prior to taking over as Editor-in-Chief, Lydia was Deputy Editor of both titles. She has also previously edited the Sunday Times Style magazine, was a columnist for the Sunday Times and for ES magazine, and has written for publications including The Times, Telegraph, Stella, You and Time. Harper's Bazaar is a title steeped in history, is the oldest title dedicated to looking at women's lives through the lens of style. Historic columnists include writers such as Charles Dickens, George Eliot, and Henry James. Bazaar and many events and initiatives around it celebrate and lift up women with the glamorous Women of the Year Awards, the Bazaar at Work programme, and the Bazaar Summit. Meanwhile, Town & Country is described as the best of both worlds, offering a high-octane mix of social, the fashionable, and the cultural with a unique British sensibility. Incidentally, it's got a very high US following. We also have with us Farrah Storr, the Editor-in-Chief of ELLE. Prior to this, Farrah was the Editor-in-Chief of Cosmopolitan, and during her 4 years grew the brand to become the #1 women's glossy. Previously, Farrah was the launch editor of Women's Health magazine, which is said to be the most successful women's launch of a decade. She is also the author of The Discomfort Zone. Farrah describes ELLE magazine and website as being a mirror to society, focused on the now and the next. As a champion of social mobility, she has done amazing work around inclusivity to ensure ELLE is for everyone. We also welcome Alex Bilmes, Editor-in-Chief of Esquire. Alex has been the Editor-in-Chief for the past 9 years. He was also the former features director at British GQ and contributing editor to British Vogue. Alex has been published in pretty much all of the British leading newspapers, including The Guardian, The Times, The Independent, Daily Mail, Spectator, Observer. And as most of you are aware, following a very highly successful strategic positioning shift 18 months ago, Esquire is now the leading voice of men's style. It has 6 issues a year and it has a really sophisticated group of committed readers who follow its refined and esoteric content revolving around luxury lifestyle. Alex leads the magazine and the website, in addition to events such as the annual star-studded Esquire Townhouse, which took place last month online for the first time. So Alex, coming to you first, it's only really become clear, or it became clear back in February time, March time, that COVID was going to be something, that really changed how we were living. How did you quickly go about changing the Esquire editorial focus or agenda?
It happened at an interesting time for Esquire. Basically, we panicked like everyone else because we had a particularly good reason to panic, because we were just putting I can't remember the exact timings. You know how hard it is now to remember back to then. It seems like forever ago. But I think we were probably less than a week away from pressing send on our travel issue, our annual travel issue, which would have been, or was, possibly the worst timing of any magazine issue ever published in the history since, Gutenberg invented the printing press, I think, because suddenly every airport was closed, every flight was grounded, every resort was closed, and we had to react really quickly. It was a challenge. We got quite lucky. I'd already commissioned for that issue, as a kind of centerpiece essay, a piece by Jeff Dyer, the novelist and critic, about how we feel about travel in today's world, with the environment and all the kind of concerns that people had even before the pandemic. So we were able to slightly ask him to change a little bit of his piece. And then by complete good fortune, we found a series of pictures by a man called Peter Marlowe, who's a fantastic Magnum photographer who I worked with years ago. He's dead now, but he was a fantastic photographer. And they were of empty, I don't know if I'm going into too much detail here, you tell me, but they're of empty spaces that you might normally associate with travel. So an empty cabin of an aeroplane, an empty departures lounge in an airport, an empty hotel lobby. He'd done all this whole essay, this whole series, and so we used them. So that was the cover, weirdly enough. It was an empty cabin of a passenger aircraft. And I mean, it's for others to say whether or not it was any good, but it certainly felt like, I think it looked, well, we looked clever, basically, which was by complete accident, even though actually what we'd done was quite stupid. But we looked sort of clever, like we'd somehow weirdly anticipated that this was going to happen. And I guess that reflects the fact that it was a kind of early indication to me, and I think others who work in magazines, that you know, we had the ability and also the permission to experiment. Because this was such a strange new world that we were operating in, and so many of the things that we usually can do, like go out into the world and take pictures of people, we couldn't, and again, once again, can't do in many cases. And we can't even send a journalist on a plane to go and you know, interrogate a country. So we had to pivot, like as everyone did. And so the issue that followed that was again completely different from the one that we had planned, a design and technology issue. And we had all sorts of stories planned. You know, someone was going to go to the West Coast of America and do a thing in Silicon Valley. Someone was going to go, I can't remember, some design studio in Italy to write a piece about automotive design. And suddenly all those people were grounded. We couldn't go to those places. So we did something completely different. We did a fiction issue, which we never would have done otherwise. And it was incredibly, I mean, I found it completely exciting, inspiring, joyful, fun, interesting thing to do. I've never done a full fiction issue before. There wasn't anything in it that wasn't fiction. It was, we were able to persuade really eminent leading writers of fiction, novelists and short story writers from around the world to contribute. I think partly because, let's face it, they didn't have anything else to do. They were stuck at home. So getting a phone call from a magazine saying, we'll pay you to write a story which could or could not be related even obliquely to the pandemic. Some of them were, some of them weren't. And I think that, you know, in some way, it's obviously, in a practical sense, it's inspiring. It also meant that I had, and I think lots of people had in all sorts of professions, a sort of existential moment of like, what exactly are we doing? What are we for? What's the point of Esquire in a world where you can't go out or you can't, you know, so many of the things we write about, you suddenly couldn't do. You couldn't go to a restaurant, you couldn't go and get measured for a suit, you couldn't go on holiday, you couldn't do all these things. So what were we there for? And I think that our conclusion is that what Esquire is for is to entertain and amuse and offer something that isn't being offered by all the other millions of news and content outlets, because they're so focused on the one big story. And the one big story obviously then was, and still is, was COVID-19. And even looking at sort of today, that we all know what the big story of the moment is, and I'm sure loads of people watching this are sort of semi-checking their phone at the same time to see if anything's happened. I know I will be in a minute. And it's, so what's Esquire, what's Esquire got to say about that? Where does Esquire exist? What position can we take? And our answer was kind of, let's allow everyone else to do the American election and the pandemic, and we will supply something different, an escape in a way. It doesn't mean it has to be completely kind of silly and not acknowledging that there's anything going on in the world. It just means that we can take a more considered, we can take a sort of step back approach. So that's what we've been doing ever since, really, I think, is thinking about how our journalism, our photography, our illustrations offer something that you can't get from your phone or from the BBC or the New York Times or the Guardian or Netflix or the Sky Sports or all the millions of other things that our readers look at. And it's been challenging and exciting and quite exhausting and sometimes annoying. And but overall, it has not been boring.
Oh, I'm sure it's not been boring. It was amazing to see how quickly teams moved. I mean, Farrah, your team at ELLE moved and quickly and produced this beautiful digital cover series of women on the front line. Meanwhile, over at Bazaar, we loved the July issue featuring artists, designers and writers sharing their creative responses to COVID. And as you say, Alex, 8 months later, we're still in uncertain times. Lydia, just going back to sort of what Alex was saying about the role, and you mentioned the word diverting, did you see the role of Bazaar as providing a sort of escapism from the current situation, or did you think it should be a reflection of the current time?
Well, I sort of felt it should be both, because we are relevant and our content does reflect the times we're living in. So, for example, we commissioned Diana Evans to write about the outpouring of support for Black Lives Matter, or the Creativity in Crisis portfolio that you mentioned, where, you know, again, we took advantage of the fact that, you know, as Alex said, you know, a lot of these amazing people, you know, from Giorgio Armani to the artist Maggie Hambling, were just stuck at home with nothing to do. And so we took the opportunity to approach them and ask them to contribute original work for the magazine, which they did. So it's not that we're ignoring what's going on at all, but we're trying to take it further, and B, we always want to have a positive, we want to, you know, you're buying a luxury magazine as a treat, and you've always got to feel better about the world when you put it down. So whether that's inspiring you with incredible photos and beautiful fashion, or wonderful writing, or a really, really in-depth analysis that actually gives you a different perspective, it just can't make you feel worse because you don't have to buy it. Yeah, so I feel like it's got to hit both points, really.
And Farrah, do you agree with that, or does ELLE slightly differ to that?
Well, I think all magazines at their heart, your job is to entertain. I mean, that is the point of magazines, it's to entertain and it's to inform. So you should never lose sight of that. I think ELLE is slightly different in that, you know, we are about the now, the new, the next. And what that means is you have to do a lot of kind of cultural surfing, which means, I suppose, we are different to Bazaar. We're less about escapism, and we're more about what's going on in culture and reflecting it back through the lens of ELLE. You know, we're called ELLE, we're about women, we're about every woman. So yeah, I mean, you know, Alex and Lydia are both right. There has to be an element of escapism. That is your job and your duty. I've never thought that magazines are a place where you talk at. So we personally don't have any columnists in ELLE, but I do think for ELLE, we had to reflect what was going on. And the other thing we had to do actually at ELLE was, you know, and this is where the kind of new and the next comes in, is, you know, my team are always tasked with, okay, this is what's happening at the moment. It feels very grim. We can reflect a little bit of the joy that's going on. So, you know, like you mentioned, our digital frontline workers, we did it immediately. As soon as lockdown happened, we were on the story. And it was uplifting, but also it was quite heavy. But for me, my job is very much to go, okay, in 12 months, in 24 months, what's going to happen? And so ELLE is slightly different in that way, which is why, you know, ELLE has always been about creativity and supporting the next generation of creatives. What me and my team have been thinking a lot about is, and for lots of different reasons, is, well, what's going to happen to the creative industries? Because ELLE won't be around if there are no creative industries. And so in lockdown, we did something quite different altogether. You know, we put an issue together with students from the most disadvantaged areas from the country, highly creative students, because we knew that once this is all over, those are the creatives, the next Alexander McQueens, who are going to be affected the most by this. So we took a slightly different approach. It's a very long-winded way of saying yes, same as Lydia to some degree, but a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. And are you able to mention, or it might be too soon, do tell me to be quiet, about some of the very interesting shoots that you did, which reflected the pandemic?
Yeah, so we did so much. I mean, look, we're about to do one at the moment, which is, it's in a bit like what Alex was saying. It's in a deserted shopping precinct with bags of, you know, high street retailers we've loved and lost. You know, it's very much, I think, fashion does have a role, actually, and it can have a role to provide escapism and beauty, but also to reflect what's going on. So that's coming up. I mean, in lockdown, look, we, out of necessity, we had to get photographers who lived with models to shoot in their house, and we had to try and send clothes to them. So the fashion shoots that came out of ELLE at that time are pretty raw. the brilliant thing that's happened is, of course, the rawness is wonderful, and it's a very different aesthetic to what we were perhaps doing, but I think it's arguably just as good. The other thing that actually happened as a consequence was, you know, I've always had this kind of dream of, you know, rightly or wrongly, it's really hard to get a stab in the media if you're not in London. Of course, with COVID, you know, we have photographers now who, you know, are shooting from Manchester. We've just taken on a new member of staff who's based in Cheshire. There's actually lots of, when you look into it, it's total panic at the time. But actually what comes through are some amazing kind of leaps forward, I think.
Yeah, I was on the production side. I was super interested that Lydia was telling me about your July issue when you were shooting Ashley Graham with a creative director via Zoom. I think you said her mother did her makeup and her husband was shooting the behind the scenes video. And of course, you know, you're doing your interviews on Zoom. So Lydia, did you find you had actually more intimate conversations as a result of being sort of zoomed into people's homes, you know, perhaps without the prying eyes of PR standing over them? Or actually, was it harder to get under their skin?
I feel like I keep saying the same thing. I think the answer is both, again, because so with Ashley Graham, you know, initially we had wanted to shoot her in a studio and it was all very sort of straight down the line. And then in the end, she sort of drove off to Nevada with her husband and her new baby. And as you say, you know, the husband shot the pictures and all we could get to her in clothes wise was a white shirt and some black leggings. So again, it was a very, very unbazar shoot. And you know, as Farrah was saying, there was a sort of rawness and an intimacy to that I really liked. And yeah, with the interview as well, because I interviewed her and she was sitting in her kitchen and she was breastfeeding her baby. And then and another for our June cover, I interviewed Rachel Weisz again over Zoom, and she was talking to me from her own kitchen in New York State, and she's very, very private, but there was her baby there, her new baby, and at one point the baby was starting sort of yelling, and Daniel Craig came in and said, oh well, I'll do the babysitting, and you know, took her away. So I mean, that's the sort of thing that you definitely wouldn't get if you were meeting them in a hotel lobby. So yeah, there's definitely insights, but on the other hand, you know, you're not in their physical presence, you know, you can't really establish the rapport that you might do if you were hanging out with them. So I have always been adamant that we have to do interviews face to face, and you know, we've refused to do interviews any other way, and now I can see, you know, I'm not like that anymore, and I feel that there are occasions when, you know, you might arguably get something better, but I mean, obviously I would still rather always meet someone.
Farrah, you were telling me a quite a fun example where a particular A-lister who won't be named actually cut the Zoom when you asked a difficult question.
Yeah, so we actually had the opposite, Lydia. So yeah, it wasn't me, but there was a journalist who was asking a difficult question, and lo and behold, the connection broke. And then when they came back, they didn't want to answer that question. So yeah, I agree with Lydia. I mean, very lucky to have moments like that with Daniel Craig, but you know, journalists spend their life trying to get celebrities in front of them. And if I was a celebrity, I wouldn't want that either. So Zoom actually, for me, I find slightly, to quote the younger generation, problematic.
Yeah, nice. Okay, perfect. Very diplomatic. Alex, coming to you, the covers of Esquire have featured, obviously, you know, some of the world's major icons and also some amazing new talent as well. How do you decide who's going to be on the cover, and you know, how big do they need to be, for example? And also, second to that, is it the case that big name celebrities still give that sort of instant circulation uplift that they used to?
I'm going to be totally honest here, since you asked that question. Is it the case? No, it's not as it used to be, that you could get Daniel Craig. Someone just, I think Farrah just mentioned, Daniel Craig would instantly add, you know, even to sort of 30% if he had a James Bond movie out that month. That's not the case anymore. I have to say we've experimented. You're right. We've been very, very lucky. We've had pretty much everyone I ever kind of wanted to get. I think there may be one or two that we have. Brad Pitt, if you're out there, give us a call.
He's definitely watching.
He's never called. No, he never calls. So we've been very lucky. We have had pretty much all the kind of, yes, iconic men of and many women too. A few years ago, we took the decision when we were kind of looking at relaunching Esquire. Relaunching is maybe slightly dramatic, but rethinking the look of it, rethinking the approach and everything, which was about, well, nearly 2 years ago now. One of the things I think that happened was partly because I've been there quite a long time, and so you do rather find yourself shooting, I mean, it sounds ridiculously spoilt, but shooting Rihanna again. And I mean, she's fantastic, and no one loves Rihanna more than me. Well, possibly. But she's, but you know, it becomes a bit repetitive. It means I've been there too long, but it also means that you want to kind of reinvent it a bit. So we started I've always thought really the ones that do best, I think, not just in terms of sales, although obviously that's really important, but in terms of just kind of credibility and the fact that I think the reader can understand. I think the reader should understand why the person's on the cover, and it can't just be, oh, they've got a new record out. It's okay if their new record is absolutely amazing and says something important or is very different from their last record or whatever. There's a story attached to it. But if it's just, oh, you know, this is this month's PR person that we could get, which, you know, I admit that on occasion it had been that in the past. I think you kind of, readers can kind of smell that. It's like, oh, you know, they're probably on the cover of the Sunday Times Culture as well, and they're on the cover of ES or whatever, or they've also done an interview with The Guardian, and oh look, they're on Graham Norton, and yeah, it's like, oh, it's their week. And I started to think that really we should look at it as who they should sort of they should deserve to be on the cover. There ought to be a reason, like, oh yeah, I get why they're on the cover, because they just did this incredible thing, or they've got something genuinely interesting or new to say, which makes it difficult. But you know, luckily for us, in one sense, we've only got 6 issues a year now. So having 12 of those people is hard. I admit, 12 people that really are that exciting. But we started looking at it differently from that point of view, trying to say, really interrogate, is this person got something to say? Are they really interesting? Do they deserve to be on the cover? Have they produced a piece of work that's so exciting that we ought to be celebrating them? Because those covers, they are celebratory, you know, they're not, it is different from a newspaper supplement cover where you're sort of, you can rip that person to pieces or whatever, or sort of analyze why our covers that we do, it's saying, we really think this person is great. So they really ought to be great. So what it means is that sometimes they're not as immediately A-list dazzling famous, because sometimes, you know, we've done David Beckham a number of times. What's the point of doing him again? It's not that I've got anything against David Beckham. It's just that I have no more to say about him, and I'm not sure Esquire has that much more to say about David Beckham. Whereas we've got Steve McQueen on the cover at the moment, not the dead one, the film director and artist, and he looks less like a male model. He looks like a normal man, and so in the old days you would have gone, oh no, he looks like a normal man. We want somebody who looks like Brad Pitt. If he don't look like Brad Pitt, they shouldn't be on the cover. That's completely upended, I think. You're now saying Steve McQueen has made this series of films, which I'm lucky enough to have seen because obviously we were working with him in the run-up to that cover. 5 films. They're going to be on the BBC. I recommend them highly if anyone's listening. They're called Small Acts, the series. It's about the history or alternative histories of Black people in Britain from the 60s to the 80s, so the period where he grew up in, really. And it's an astonishing piece of work, and he is a fantastically interesting, spiky, difficult, talented man who is a British man of my generation. And I'm fascinated by Steve McQueen. I've interviewed him a number of times before, and you're just like, okay, this has got real worth. It's culturally relevant, it's interesting, and it's not boring, and it's also slightly unexpected, because he a lot of times in the past we would have tried to find who's the star of Hit a Small Axe, and let's put them on the cover, even though at the end of the day it's an actor. So how interesting are they going to be compared to the guy who wrote it, directed it, thought of it? And you know, of course they're going to be less interesting, eloquent, and so on. And so I'm quite proud of the fact that we are able to do these, to mix it up a bit. And it doesn't mean we'll never do another person just because they're fantastically good looking and look good in a suit. You know, of course we will. But I just think that we're just trying to look at it in a more different way and trying to do things that are sometimes surprising. You know, I think it helps to stand out a little bit more, so that it's not just a whole row of magazines with the same person, or if not the same person, then a person who looks very similar to the person next to them on the newsstand.
No, it's interesting. I mean, we've been thinking about sort of icons quite a lot over COVID. I mean, the concept of the hero is definitely changing. And I think, yeah, we are more interested in learning about doctors, nurses, key workers than pop stars potentially at this time. And also, of course, the sort of really international conversation about diversity possibly means that we're open to and want to explore more people's lives than we ever have before. And actually, Lydia, this reflects how you sort of pivoted the Woman of the Year project. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Yes, so our Women of the Year issue, which is December, always celebrates, you know, we usually would have a category, the Model of the Year, you know, the Television Star of the Year, and it's a very sort of A-listy event, and people like Kate Blanchett turn up, and it's sort of our version of the Oscars. And obviously this year it was very difficult because we couldn't celebrate. It felt tone deaf to be going down the same route, but at the same time, Bazaar is a fashion magazine, and we couldn't just do the kind of frontline worker thing either. And so we thought long and hard about how we could keep it relevant, but also keep it Bazaar. And what we came up with in the end was, instead of doing categories, we chose a person who sort of starred in every single month. So, and obviously the situation changed so enormously over the course of those months. And, you know, at one point, you know, everybody was celebrating the NHS, and then there was another point, and then, you know, there was the Black Lives Matter, and then, you know, we moved through all sorts of different aspects. And so we wanted to choose somebody that felt relevant to each one. So that's what we did. So we have, as well as our cover star, Lashana Lynch, who is the first Black female 007. We obviously, that would have been very relevant if the Bond film had come out, which it didn't. But so alongside that, we chose 12 people who had impressed us individually in those months. So they ranged from Daisy Edgar Jones in April, because Normal People was the show that kept us all sort of, you know, feeling a bit more positive at the height of the pandemic, to Professor Sarah Gilbert, who was leading on the Oxford vaccine. And it gave us the ability to have a much wider range of people to celebrate, because obviously we weren't going to say we couldn't do film star because there weren't any films, but there were, on the other hand, there was a lot of really, really excellent television that we wanted to celebrate. So we also celebrated Michaela Cole. And, you know, I think it was a good way of doing it. And it did mean that we could have a much wider range of people. Yeah, so that's what we did. And
presumably the award ceremony will hopefully take place next year as usual, but this year unfortunately had to be.
Yes, I mean we did think about having maybe a sort of dinner, a winner's dinner, but in the end we couldn't even do that. So it's just all virtual for now. But what we have asked the winners to do, we've got master classes from several of our winners, talking about how, you know, their own, you know, the reason that we're celebrating them. So for example, we have we have Jane Fonda on how to be an activist, and so that will be being released later on, and that sort of thing. Yeah, so there is a sort of little kind of live element, as it were,
yeah,
added to the mix.
I mean, because actually the Women of the Year is just one small part of your, I guess, what's become a sort of feminist agenda of lifting up women by Bazaar. And actually your Bazaar at Work Week is running this month. It's 16th to 19th of November, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. We'll make sure everybody checks out that. Are you looking to build out this this sort of narrative even further? And actually, whilst I have you sort of talking about, you know, just generally your vision for Harper's Bazaar, I'd love to hear a bit more about, yeah, your vision and your plans.
Well, yes. Okay, so later today, I am actually about to go off and film intros for Bazaar at Work Week, which you've just mentioned, and is the way that we've had to pivot our annual Bazaar Summit, which is our conference for women in leadership. And we obviously couldn't do that, couldn't get everybody into a room. So we were going to film everybody doing panel discussions today, and now we can't even do that, so everybody's going to be filmed over Zoom like this, and we have some, you know, amazing speakers, you know, from June Sarpong and Laura Bates of Everyday Sexism, and the director of inclusion at Netflix, all talking about, you know, how diversity can actually boost your business and why it's so important, and, you know, AI experts on the future of work and things like that. I felt, well, when I arrived at Bazaar, I was given the Bazaar at Work programme, and at that point it was a sort of very sporadic thing, and we did the odd career feature, but I realised that there were women that would come every single time we did an event, because they were really hungry for career. It wasn't career advice, it was sort of networking at quite a high level, and that we started doing a monthly Bazaar at Work event to tie in with a feature, and then that sort of developed into the summit, and I realized that there was this very very committed readership of women in loyal career women in high level positions, who really wanted an opportunity to speak to each other and to hear from, you know, women at the very top, and so we've maintained that, and I would like to build on that, and I'm looking to set up some sort of network so that these women, so that we can get that community together, and, you know, really make sure that we're offering them all the content and all the opportunities that they are looking for. So for me, that's as much of a pillar of our brand as fashion, and as culture. So that's something I'm definitely looking to build on. Yeah.
That sounds fantastic. What else?
Well, so I mean, we will at some point tweak the design. Again, that's something I think that we'll have to wait until we're all back together again, because I find these sort of remote redesigns are very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, in my head, it was interesting listening to you, Alex, because in my head, every issue has a sort of a theme, whether official or unofficial. So I'm sort of trying to plan ahead for what those themes would be for the rest of the year. So February for me is about visionary women. And then March, as well as, obviously it's our big fashion issue, but it will also be about International Women's Day, and I'm looking to land a very hard-hitting, high-level interview there. And then April for me is curiosity. It's and I'm sort of hoping that we might possibly be allowed to leave our houses and travel a bit, and so, you know, that I'm sort of slightly banking on that. Obviously we will be prepared to pivot if we have to, but yes, so I don't envisage a huge revolution, because I love Bazaar and I've worked there already for 5 years, and but I feel that it's just evolving kind of organically.
Well, perfect. And we haven't spoken enough about Town and Country. Tell us about any coming plans for that.
Well, Town and Country is about the best of both worlds, and in a way that makes it quite, it can sort of slightly rise above the problems that are going on. You know, it's about fantasy, it's about aspiration, it's about escape, and it's celebrating the joys of nature and the countryside. We have a very international readership, so in a way it doesn't have to be terribly pegged to things that are going on. They love us, they love it when we go into sort of big stately homes and we speak to the owners and we, you know, get recipes from, you know, their cook and that sort of thing, or you know, investigate royal stories. It's quite I don't want to say old-fashioned, it's not old-fashioned, but it's sort of it sort of doesn't, it rises above. I mean, I love it. I absolutely love Town and Country, and that is a magazine that, you know, if you pick it, if you're feeling a bit gloomy, you know, you pick it up and it's just gorgeous couture gowns and fabulous jewelry and, you know, lovely cars and amazing travel and things like that. So it's a real sort of luxury pick-me-up.
Sounds exactly what we all need at the moment. Alex, coming back to you, we haven't spoken enough about you know, your events and how those have had to pivot. In particular, obviously, you normally have this star-studded Esquire townhouse. Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, how that worked this year, and then indeed sort of what else you've got planned in terms of events? And then actually, if you don't mind, big question then, about some of your forthcoming plans for Esquire.
Okay, that's a lot to.
Okay. I realised I missed a question earlier.
No, that's all right. Okay, so townhouse, yeah. So exactly as Lydia was saying, we usually it's a physical event. I was deeply sceptical about where, you know, because I always am. That's my job, I suppose. It's certainly my inclination. Deeply sceptical about how that could work, because the idea is you pay your money and you get to be in the room and ask questions of, and maybe even have a drink at the bar with sort of A-list creative people, mostly fashion, movies, books, TV, art, kind of doing Q&As, and sometimes there's supper clubs. It's a very sort of tactile experience, and I didn't know how that would work in a virtual online. But more fool me really, because it was very well, again, not really for me to say, but it was it seems that the perception was that it went really well. We had again, it's slightly different because obviously it's not tactile, you can't meet the person, and even I met one of them because I did the interview, but I didn't meet anyone else, and I didn't get to do my kind of, you know, it's a weird thing doing an event because I'm a journalist and suddenly you're sort of like a publican as well, which is a bit weird, you know, like running your own sort of restaurant, pub, club thing for a weekend. And so we didn't get to do any of that, which is a shame. But it does work it really works incredibly well. There's a number of reasons why. You can get anyone in the world. They don't have to come. They don't have to be in London. They don't have to be in the room. You are not asking them to perform in front of a live audience. You're asking them to meet one person, a journalist usually, just as they would do for a print interview, or they're very accustomed, obviously, the people like that, to doing broadcast interviews. So it's a bit more like that, I suppose, you know. So I did Steve McQueen, who we spoke about before. We had Riz Ahmed, the amazing actor and activist. We had Arsene Wenger, the former Arsenal football manager. And lots of very exciting, interesting, high-profile people talk. And what it is a series of kind of long-form interviews, like you would, much longer than you would, and more. And I would suggest, obviously I would, but more deeper and substantial than you're accustomed to seeing on TV, or, you know, or online, just because it's I don't know, but it seems to me unusual to see someone talking in quite detail about their work quite seriously for, you know, up 40 minutes, even longer. I don't know how long, up to an hour, and then they're kind of sliced up and made contemporary and relevant and put on social media, you know, with the kind of highlights of what the people said, or the kind of top line, what we would have thought of as the headline before. And it was very successful in that sense, in the sense that, you know, how many hundreds of thousands of people have seen at least a part of these talks. So I was very encouraged by that, and so was, I think, my team. And I hope that our partner, which is Breitling, they seemed happy. I hope they are happy. It was a good result, I think, for everyone, especially under the circumstance. And it goes back to what I was saying before. We are supplying, I hate that word content, but content that isn't really widely available elsewhere. It's not that you can't see or read an interview with Arsene Wenger or Steve McQueen. You can. It's not. We're not. I'm not pretending I'm the only journalist he's spoken to, but it's seeing it in a different way, in a more sort of substantial way. And it really is that idea of bringing the brand to life, bringing the magazine to life. So we're very. That was my post arriving, by the way. We're very keen on replicating that. I very much hope that the townhouse and other events will be able to happen in physically. We all do, right? I mean, everyone wants at some stage to get back to living a less cloistered existence. But I'm also keen to keep going with this, because I think, you know, as Farrah said earlier, you can. There are silver linings to these clouds, right? And for us, one of them is we've experimented with things that I wouldn't necessarily have thought would work, and found that they've worked. So let's keep doing them. So I want to. I'm hopeful that we can get something going on a more regular basis in addition to the townhouse. Maybe there'll be smaller one-off things. You know, it might be one person a month that we do, or we maybe cluster them around things like, if there's a film festival. You know, well, there will be at some point, I hope, if there's still films. We could do 4 people around that and package that and sell. And the idea is, frankly, it's a commercial idea. It's to sell them to sponsors. So it's sort of a curated editorial in a way. It's saying, because we can't do it without that, because we can't afford to. It's quite expensive to get a proper broadcast quality camera crew together. And a venue in which you can do them. So you need sponsorship. And so that's one aim for next year. I think you asked me just generally about next year as well. So that's one thing. And I think that plays, I think I absolutely appreciate and sort of agree with what Lydia was just saying about themes, but the themes can sometimes be in the head of the editor or the team. They don't have to be stated. That's based sort of what you said, Lydia, right? I don't want to paraphrase and get it wrong, but so we've actually been doing, Esquire has been very sort of rigidly themed since we relaunched nearly 2 years ago. And one thing we discovered in lockdown is that you can, as I was describing with the travel issue, you can become a sort of victim of your own theme, especially now, because it's all very well saying, let's do a big travel issue, sumptuous travel issue, but if they close the airports, it's going to be difficult and also irrelevant to the reader. So having themed myself into a corner, I'm now untheming, and the next issue, Jan Feb, is not really themed. Well, it's not themed, and that's the first time we haven't themed one for a while. And the reason is just, yeah, well, there's a number of reasons. One is I didn't want to be forced into a corner anymore, and the other is I think that it becomes we only do 6 a year. If you know 3 years in advance that in May 2024 it's going to be a travel issue, there's something slightly dispiriting about that to me. I kind of like to keep my options a little bit more open. So while there are some that are rigid, like March issue and the September issue, they're always going to be fashion issues, and that's as it should be, and that's right, and that's one of the main reasons that people pick up Esquire, is because they like clothes. So that's a piece of genuine news. You're saying, look at the new collections. But the rest of them, I think, I'm looking forward to keeping experimenting, because we don't, with the best will in the world, we don't actually know what's going to happen, do we? We didn't anticipate that we would be in lockdown today when we were discussing this talk even a week ago.
Exactly.
And so, you know, futurology, that to me is like the ultimate pseudoscience. We just, anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen next week is talking out of his hat, frankly. So, so we, for that reason, really, I'm reluctant to kind of say, oh, we're definitely going to do, you know, this big issue in the summer that's going to be all about this, because it can just get shut down quite easily, and you need to have the ability to improvise. And actually improvising is fun, and it can lead to unexpected good stuff. It can also lead to terrible mistakes, but you know, those are the chances you take.
Well, absolutely, and that's really exciting. That we'll look forward to see what comes out from you. Perfect. Farrah, coming back to you, ELLE magazine. Obviously, this year has been a big year for social mobility, and having that conversation, and then your actual September issue initiative. Are you hoping to do more of that in the near future and far future?
I'm not sure anyone knows what our September issue is, though, Rosie.
Yeah, tell us.
We haven't spoken about it. Yes, I mean, look, just very briefly, it's kind of more social dismobility, I would think, in the next year, if we're being honest. Our September issue, for those that don't know, we did it in partnership with the Social Mobility Commission. We wanted to do it properly. We wanted to get students who we knew weren't at school. We wanted to get them engaged with a creative endeavour. So what better way than to take over the September issue of ELLE, which, as Alex said, is the big, you know, historically it's the big fashion issue of the year. So what we did is we, you know, a lot of people are doing mentorships, which is great, but we were like, we need to make sure that we're getting the right kids. So what we did is we looked at the kind of the cold spots of the country, and we worked with schools, with teachers in those cold spots, and we said, look, we're looking for 12 young men or women to come and work on ELLE. We'll commit to a 12-month mentorship, so they don't just work in the September issue and then disappear. We are in their lives for the next 12 months. And we were very clear with the teachers, we're not looking for academic excellence, we're looking for kids with potential, because, you know, teachers always give you the brightest child, and we were like, actually, it's not what we're looking for. So that was a September issue. We will do it again, and we'll do it on a much bigger scale. You know, those 12 young women hopefully are kind of on their way now, but we'll do it on a much bigger scale, possibly with some celebrity involvement, possibly not. To Alex's point, it depends on what they have to offer. But yeah, so it will be a big thing for us again next year, and we'll just make it bigger.
It sounds very exciting, and presumably a lot of that content is online, so we can have a little look at the September initiative on the website.
Yes, some of it is online. I mean, not all of it is online, but some of it is online. And the bylines of the young women that we're working with, people will start to see if they read ELLE. So yes, if you want to read about it, there is enough out there that you can see what we did. It's all over our social media.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic initiative, and a huge congratulations to you for that. In terms of sort of more on the editorial side of things, or more on the event side of things, have you got anything lined up, or like Alex, perhaps you're loath to make plans right now?
Totally loath to make plans. I think it would be foolish. And actually, the whole point of ELLE is to be about surprise. It's about being a little bit on the edge. I think for me, that's always how you make the best editorial decisions, actually, is when you're right up against the wire. Because you then go with your gut instinct, and it's often the right, you know, if I planned, this is just me as an editor, I'm very different, but if I planned a year in advance themed issues, it would be the death of me as an editor. I couldn't do it. I'm not organized. So it's much more, it's more about surprise. I suppose what I can tell you is, it's kind of similar to what Lydia was saying and Alex was saying, is that the kind of era of cover stars, they're not over exactly, but they have always been about, well, what do you stand for? What have you got to say? And so actually, we're not always going to do celebrities. Our January issue, which I can't tell you about, but it's a cover image. It does have someone on the cover, but it's a talking point. It's less about the person on the cover, and it's more about what they kind of want to talk about. Hopefully it will, you know, I've always thought the magazines I've worked on and sort of on Cosmo and ELLE, the best thing that a journalist can do is spark debate and have lots of different, you know, opinions going round. That's kind of your job. So I think our covers will do that a little bit more. They'll kind of poke lots of different bears and let all the bears come together and have a conversation.
Oh, it sounds great. One question though is I guess when you talk about your role as the editor and sort of being, I guess, the conductor of all of this, how much do you personally see your role? And this is a question that I actually asked you a couple of weeks ago when we were planning this, but actually it's just come up in the chat. So I'm going to put it to you again just before we close. How much do you feel that the magazine is a reflection of yourself and your identity versus versus it sort of being something for the people? How much, I guess, how much is it about you as editor-in-chief?
Well, I think it would be naive to, it should never be about you, you know, like I said, that's why we don't have columnists. I'm very keen to, you know, not to be infected by one voice. That I've never thought that's the point of magazines. They should all be different voices. That's why editors, when they take on a job, I've been there just over a year now, that's why they have to go through the archives and they have to find out what the heritage is, and then they have to go, well, how can I reinterpret that for today? So, you know, yes, social mobility is something I care about, but why is it in ELLE? Well, it's in ELLE because really ELLE has always been about discovering the next new talents, and they can come from any place in the country. So but in answer to your question, I do think it is inevitable that the kind of sweat and blood of an editor does not manifest itself in some way into the magazine, and you have to be really careful. And that's why you have to have, it's such a terrible cliche, the word diverse now, but you do have to have a and when I say diverse, like a really diverse team who don't agree with you. You know, my kind of number 2 and 3, we actually don't have the same outlook on the world, and that's absolutely as it should be. And that makes sure that your product is not every page will speak to everyone. And for me, that's kind of the point of an effective product.
That very much reflects, we were having a hospitality conversation earlier, I don't know if you caught it, but we had one of the head of Bilmes for Women in Travel who was saying exactly that. First of all, you have to get your internal culture correct and diverse before then you can then put out what it is you want to put out in the world. In their instance, marketing, but in this instance, obviously, sort of content, editorial, etc. From your side of things, it's vital, and it's so important and so great that, you know, it's come up twice in one morning, which is brilliant in totally different industries. So I'm really pleased to hear that. I'm just honing in on a couple of questions from our audience. Lydia, we've got 2 minutes to go. So what is your advice for PRs? Yes, I guess it's a question of how to break through all the noise that you get from all the millions of PRs who are trying to grapple for your attention.
Well, I think the really fundamental thing is, you know, obviously read the magazine, because I cannot tell you how many emails I get with people asking me if I would be interested in reviewing I'll say a lawnmower, but it's actually much worse than that. And, you know, it's just so irritating, and it kind of then means that you've become blasé and you just don't look at anything. So, but if somebody emails me directly with a focused pitch where they have clearly read the magazine and know what they're talking about, then I will always read it. So yeah, I just think it's, you know, but you know, and then the other thing that I really hate is when somebody's asked me if I'll review a lawnmower and I ignore it because, you know, that's the politest response. They then chase me 2 days later going, did you see my pitch for the lawnmower? I mean, so then I will immediately put you in my junk folder.
What have you got against lawnmowers, Lydia? This is an interesting insight.
It's a euphemism, Alex.
Don't like to mow the lawn. What is it?
I'm not saying.
All lawnmower pictures to Alex.
Yeah, I would be happy to review lawnmowers.
There we are. Is that the big takeaway of the day?
My plan B for when it all, you know, when the bomb drops, I'm going to be a lawnmower critic.
Exactly. we'll have no homes, but yeah, exactly. You will have perfect lawns.
Exactly.
Thank you so much to all three of you. A huge thank you, Lydia, Farrah and Alex. That has been a hugely insightful session. Thank you. Next up, we have the outstanding Justine Picardy in conversation with Jacqueline Newey, Chief Luxury Officer at Hearst UK. The link is in your schedule shared yesterday. It's also in an email that's come to you an hour ago and can also be found on the forum microsite. It will start in less than a minute. So go, go, go. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.